Clean his barn, fat pig. Obese girl sent to mountain man as joke. But he saw her beauty. Clean his barn, fat pig. Maybe the cows will finally feel skinny. The insult cracked across the sun-baked square of Timber Ridge like a whip. Laughter followed, sharp and ugly, bouncing off the wooden storefronts and dusty windows as if the whole town were in on the joke. Abigail Turner froze in the middle of the street, her arms straining around the wicker laundry basket pressed to her chest. At 18, she was soft and round in every place the town believed a girl should be slim. 5'3", nearly 115 kilos, wrapped in a faded brown dress that pulled too tight at the seams. Her cheeks, already plump, burned crimson as the crowd closed in. "How many pies did you steal from the bakery today, Abby?" Brett Calloway sneered, sauntering toward her. His blonde hair gleamed in the harsh Colorado sun, his shirt clean, his boots polished. A perfect picture of the blacksmith's handsome son. 5, 10, or did you just eat the whole tray? The group around him howled. "Look at that belly," Sarah drawled from behind her lace parasol. "I swear, she's one biscuit away from rolling down Main Street." Abigail swallowed hard, fingers whitening around the basket handle. Inside were neatly folded shirts and dresses, the day's work she hadn't even been paid for yet. "Please," she whispered, voice shaking, "let me pass. I have to return these. They're not mine." Brett stepped in front of her, blocking the way. "That's the problem, Abby. Nothing's ever yours, is it?" He shoved her shoulder. The basket tipped. Linen and cotton spilled into the dust. A white blouse, Mrs. Henderson's favorite, landed right under Brett's boot. "No, wait." Abigail dropped to her knees, scrambling to gather the clothes. Her fingers trembled as she brushed dirt from a cuff. "Please don't." Brett ground his heel into the blouse. Grit and mud smeared across the clean fabric. "Oops." He flashed a grin that never reached his eyes. "Guess your big, clumsy hands ruined it." The square erupted again. No one stepped forward. No one told him to stop. From the steps of the general store, Mrs. Henderson herself marched forward, skirt swishing, face pinched with outrage. "Abigail Turner," she snapped, "have you ruined my blouse again?" Abigail's heart plummeted. "Mrs. Henderson, I didn't. I promise. They pushed me. The slap came fast and hot, snapping her head to the side. "Liar," Mrs. Henderson hissed. "You're slow, you're careless, and you're lucky I hire you at all. Look at you, all that flesh and not a bit of grace." Abigail's eyes stung. I just need my pay. I haven't eaten since yesterday." Mrs. Henderson plucked a single copper cent from her reticule and flicked it into the dirt at Abigail's knees. "There, for your trouble. Enough for stale bread. You should starve a little. It might even help." Laughter rolled through the crowd again. Abigail stared at the coin. She knew if she didn't pick it up, she wouldn't eat. She also knew that if she did, the last scrap of dignity she'd been clinging to would crumble. Her stomach twisted. Her fingers moved anyway. "Well, well," Brett said suddenly, eyes lighting with a cruel idea. "I heard Gideon Stone needs someone to clean out his barn." He smirked. "What do you say, Sarah? Think the mountain man wants a pig to muck his stalls?" Sarah giggled behind her hand. "Timber Ridge's finest gift. We should send her up as a favor." "A joke," another boy added. "Let's see how long she lasts before he sends her rolling back down the mountain." Mrs. Henderson's lips curled. "Abigail, you will go to Ridge Peak. You will work for Gideon Stone for 1 month. If you last, I will pay you $10. If you run back, you owe me $50. Do you understand?" Abigail's throat closed. Ridge Peak, the wild mountain above town, the place mothers used to frighten children into obedience, and Gideon Stone, half legend, half ghost, a man who killed a mountain lion with his bare hands, a man who lived alone with his grief and his guns. I can't go alone," she whispered. "You don't have a choice," Mrs. Henderson said coldly. "You have debts, and no one else wants you." Brett grabbed Abigail's arm. "Come on, Abigail. The mountain's waiting. Gideon Stone is going to love his new barn girl." The crowd parted, watching as they dragged her toward the waiting wagon like a piece of unwanted cargo. None of them noticed the tall figure standing just beyond the edge of town, reins in hand, pausing on his way back from the trading post. Gideon Stone's blue eyes narrowed as Brett's voice carried through the hot afternoon air again. "Clean his barn, fat pig." And for the first time in 5 long, lonely years, the mountain man felt anger twist in his chest for someone other than himself. The wagon lurched forward, its wooden wheels cracking over stones as Brett snapped the reins far harder than needed. Abigail gripped the sideboards, each jolt sending her soft body rocking painfully. The dust stung her eyes, blurring the world into brown and gold. She kept her head down. It was easier that way. If she didn't look at them, maybe she wouldn't hear their laughter. But she always did. Sarah rode alongside on horseback, her parasol balanced elegantly as she smirked down at the wagon bed. "Be sure to smile for him, Abigail. Men adore a cheerful servant." "Especially one with a built-in cushion," another voice jeered from behind. More laughter, always more. Abigail closed her eyes. She tried to breathe slowly, tried not to let her shaking hands show how terrified she was. But the mountain loomed closer with every turn of the wheel. Dark pines rising like a wall, the air cooling, the road narrowing. Ridge Peak was a beautiful place from afar. Up close, it felt like entering another world entirely. A world where Gideon Stone lived. She'd heard stories her entire life. Some said he didn't speak to another human for years. Others swore he had the strength of a bear and the heart of a corpse. A man who'd buried a wife and child and never came back down from the grief. A ghost walking in human form. Abigail shivered. What if the cruel joke turned into something worse? What if he truly didn't want her there? The wagon finally rattled to a stop before a wide clearing. A sturdy cabin stood at the far edge, hand-built from heavy logs, its porch shaded, smoke curling gently from the chimney. Animals grazed in a nearby pasture, and a barn stood slightly downhill, its roof clean and newly repaired. It was peaceful. It was alive. And Abigail suddenly felt more out of place than she ever had in her life. Brett hopped down from the wagon. "Well," he said, dusting off his sleeves, "let's meet the beast of the mountain." He stomped up the porch steps and banged his fist loudly on the door. Abigail sat frozen in the wagon, heart hammering against her ribs. The door opened. Gideon Stone filled the frame, broad shoulders stretching the wool of his shirt, dark hair brushing his collar, a shadow of beard outlining a jaw built from sharp angles and old strength. His eyes landed on Brett, cold and assessing. Then they slid past him toward the wagon. Abigail's breath caught. Up close he was even taller than the rumors, easily over 6'6", and his presence hit like a physical force, not cruel, not angry, just vast, like the mountain itself had taken human form. "What?" Gideon said slowly. "Do you want?" Brett grinned. "Mr. Stone, sir. We heard you needed help around the place, so we brought you a gift, a helper." He gestured grandly toward the wagon. "Timber Ridge's finest." Abigail flinched. Gideon's gaze followed the gesture. For one long moment, for one agonizing heartbeat, his eyes locked on her. She braced for disdain, for disgust, for the familiar flinch people made when seeing her size. But he didn't look away. His expression didn't twist. The blue of his eyes, sharp as ice melt, softened almost imperceptibly. She didn't know what he saw in her, maybe nothing at all, but it wasn't cruelty. "I didn't ask for help," Gideon said, his tone flat. "Take her back." Brett's smile faltered. "Well, she's already here." "Then bring her home," Gideon replied, starting to close the door. "Mr. Stone," Brett blurted, "she has nowhere else to go. Everyone in town agrees she's better off here. She'll work hard. She'll clean the barn, cook, whatever you tell her." Gideon's eyes narrowed. "Why are you really here, boy?" "It's just a kindness," Brett lied with practiced ease. Gideon stepped outside, towering over him. "I know the kind of kindness that comes from your family and your friends." Brett swallowed, retreating half a step. Gideon turned to the wagon again. "Is this what you want?" he asked Abigail. His voice was gentler now, gentler than she'd ever heard from anyone. Her throat constricted. I don't want to cause trouble. I can work. I can clean and cook and do anything. I just need a chance." A flicker crossed Gideon's face, something like recognition, pain, memory. He took a slow breath. "Come down from there," he said quietly. "You're not cargo." Abigail stood on shaking legs. Brett moved as if to help her, but Gideon's glare stopped him mid-reach. "She walks," Gideon said. "Alone." Abigail climbed down, gripping the wagon rail, her steps unsteady on the rocky ground. Gideon extended a large hand, not forcing, simply offering. She didn't take it. She was too ashamed, but his patience didn't waver. When her feet finally touched the earth, he stepped back to give her space. "Inside," he said. "You look cold." Brett let out a mocking laugh. "Enjoy your new pig, Mr. Stone." Gideon's head snapped toward him. The air shifted. Even Sarah's smile vanished. "Leave," Gideon growled. Brett scrambled back onto the wagon. The horses lurched. Dust flew. And within moments, the sound of their laughter faded into the trees. Silence settled in the clearing. Abigail stood trembling, hands clenched at her sides. Gideon spoke first. "No one touches you on this mountain unless you say so. You're safe here." Her breath hitched. No one had ever spoken those words to her. "Come," he said, opening the cabin door. "You look like you could use a warm meal." For the first time in her life, Abigail stepped into a place where no laughter followed her, where no one stared, where she wasn't a joke. The door shut softly behind them, sealing out the wind, the dust, and the last echo of the cruel laughter drifting down the mountain road. Abigail stood motionless just inside the threshold, clutching her hands together as if afraid of taking up space. The cabin was warm, truly warm, in a way she hadn't felt in years. The fire in the stone hearth burned bright, spreading a golden glow across the wooden floorboards. Everything smelled of cedar, resin, and something faintly sweet. Maybe fresh bread. It felt lived in. It felt safe. Gideon set his gloves on the table, then turned toward her. "Sit," he said simply. "You've had a long ride." Abigail obeyed, lowering herself slowly into one of the sturdy chairs near the fireplace. She kept her eyes on her lap, terrified she might break something simply by existing. She'd lived her whole life in places where people snapped at her for sitting wrong, breathing wrong, being too noticeable and too large. Gideon walked into the small kitchen space, poured hot water from a kettle, and set a heavy clay mug of tea before her. "Drink," he said. She wrapped her hands around the mug, startled by how gentle the words sounded. "Thank you," she whispered. He nodded once and pulled up another chair, sitting across from her, not looming, not threatening, just watching. After a moment he asked, "They forced you up here?" Abigail swallowed hard. "They said I owed a debt. They said I had to work for whoever would take me. And they thought I'd be too kind to send you away." It wasn't a question. "I don't want pity," she said quickly, her voice breaking. "I can work. I'll work hard." Gideon leaned back slightly. In the firelight, the scars on his forearm seemed deeper, the shadows beneath his eyes darker. "I don't keep people as servants," he said. "If you stay, it's because you choose to, not because someone else chose for you." She stared at him, stunned. "In town, no one ever—" "I'm not the town," he cut in gently, "and you're not their property." Abigail pressed a trembling hand against her chest, trying to swallow the emotion rising inside her. I don't know where else to go," she admitted softly. "Then for tonight," Gideon said. "This is your home. For tonight." The words lodged in her heart like a promise and a warning wrapped into one. She took a slow sip of tea. Her hands steadied. The warmth spread through her fingertips. Gideon stood. "I'll show you your room." He led her to a small door near the back of the cabin. Inside was a modest space, a bed with thick quilts, a small dresser, a window looking into the pines. Clean, simple, safe. Abigail's throat tightened. "This is for me?" "For as long as you need it." She reached out and touched the quilt. It was soft, hand-stitched. Someone had sewn it with care. Someone had once built a home here with love. "Your wife made this?" she asked quietly. Gideon froze. The silence that followed was heavy, brittle as winter ice. "Yes," he said finally. "Rebecca made it, before she passed." Abigail bowed her head. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have asked." "You didn't do anything wrong." Gideon's voice softened. "It's been 5 years, but some ghosts stay close." She nodded, her own voice barely audible. "I know what that feels like." He didn't press for details. She was grateful. Eventually, Gideon stepped back toward the kitchen. "Wash up if you want. There's hot water in the washroom. I'll finish supper." Abigail watched him move, quiet, efficient, calm. Not a man who needed company, but one who didn't fear silence. She felt drawn to that steadiness, like a drowning person reaching for something solid. In the washroom, she scrubbed the dust from her face and hands. When she looked into the small mirror, she barely recognized herself. Her cheeks were swollen from crying, her hair tangled, her body still trembling. But her eyes, they were alive in a way she hadn't seen in years. She returned to the table just as Gideon set down a plate of stew, dense with meat and root vegetables, steam rising in fragrant curls. "I can help," she said timidly. "Tomorrow," he replied. "Tonight, you rest." Abigail picked up the spoon but hesitated. "Are you sure? People don't usually feed me first." His brow furrowed. "You're hungry." "Yes, but also I don't want you to think I'm greedy." "Eating when you're hungry isn't greed." His tone held an undercurrent of anger, not at her, but at the people who'd put that fear into her. "No one goes hungry in my home." It was the closest thing to a vow. She took a bite. Tears sprang to her eyes. The food was simple, but to her it tasted like the first real kindness she'd ever been shown. "Thank you," she whispered again. Gideon nodded, then ate his own supper quietly across from her. The fire crackled. Outside, the wind drifted through the pines. With every minute that passed, Abigail felt the mountains settle around her, not as a threat, but as a shelter. When the meal ended, she gathered their dishes instinctively. Gideon made no move to stop her, but watched with a faint, unreadable expression. "You don't have to do that tonight," he said. "I want to," she replied. And she did. For the first time in her life, doing something for someone else didn't feel like forced labor. It felt grounding, like her hands knew what belonging felt like before her heart did. Later, when she crawled beneath the quilt, its stitched patterns warm against her skin, she whispered into the darkness, maybe they were wrong about me." Outside her door, she heard Gideon rise from his chair, stoke the fire, and check the locks with practiced care. He paused for a long moment outside her room, as if making sure she was safe, before his footsteps retreated. Abigail closed her eyes, a tear slipping silently into her pillow. For the first night in her life, she wasn't crying because she was hated. She was crying because she wasn't. Morning came softly on the mountain. Sunlight filtered through the thin curtains of Abigail's new room, brushing its warmth across her cheek. For a moment, she didn't remember where she was. Her mind reached instinctively for the familiar ache of hunger, for the cold, hard floor she'd grown used to sleeping on in town, for the dread of facing another day filled with jokes at her expense. But the blankets were warm, the mattress was soft, and somewhere beyond the door the smell of coffee drifted through the air. Her breath caught. It hadn't been a dream. She swung her feet over the edge of the bed slowly, as if afraid the cabin would vanish if she moved too quickly. The wooden floor was warm beneath her toes. The fire in the hearth must still be burning. When she opened the door, she found Gideon already chopping wood outside. His shirt sleeves were rolled to the elbows, revealing forearms knotted with the kind of strength built from years of labor. Each swing of the axe was clean, controlled, ending with a satisfying crack through the quiet morning. He glanced toward her without breaking rhythm. "You wake early?" "I'm used to it." Abigail folded her hands before her. "Should I start breakfast?" Gideon lowered the axe, wiped his brow with the back of his wrist, and shook his head. "I already did. You'll join me?" Her heart thumped. No one ever made breakfast for her. Inside, the small kitchen table was set. 2 plates, 2 cups, a loaf of fresh cornbread still warm from the skillet, and a pot of beans simmered overnight. Abigail stopped in the doorway, overwhelmed. "You cooked all this?" Gideon shrugged. "I cook, I clean, I mend my own gear. A man who lives alone learns what he needs to survive." Abigail approached slowly. "You're very good at it." He poured her a cup of coffee, then sat. "Eat." She obeyed quietly, taking small, cautious bites. The cornbread tasted like sunshine, the beans melted on her tongue, and Gideon watched her with an expression that wasn't pity, not even close, more like making sure she had enough. They ate in silence, but it wasn't stiff. It felt like the cabin itself breathed between them, filling the quiet with peace. After breakfast, Gideon stood. "Today you'll learn the layout of the place." "I can do any task you need," Abigail replied quickly. "I can scrub floors, wash clothes, cook, anything." He paused, studying her. "You don't have to earn your right to be here every second of the day." Her hands twisted together. "But I do. I've always had to." Gideon's jaw tightened, anger simmering behind his eyes, not at her, but at the world that had taught her this fear. "You'll work because it's your home now," he said, voice low, "not because you owe me." She nodded, swallowing hard. She didn't fully believe him yet, but she wanted to. He spent the morning walking her around the land. The barn stood on a gentle slope, roof gleaming from a recent repair. "We'll clean it together this afternoon," he said, "not because you were sent here to do it, because it needs doing." Abigail ducked her head. "All right." Past the barn, a small pasture stretched into the pines where a handful of cattle grazed lazily. A few goats darted between the rocks. Chickens strutted in their coop, clucking softly. Abigail touched the coop fence. "They're beautiful." "They're loud," Gideon corrected, though a hint of a smile tugged the corner of his mouth. "But they keep me alive." She followed him back toward the cabin, noticing how carefully he moved, how he always checked the path ahead, always scanned the trees, always made sure she walked where the ground was smoothest, as if protecting another person was a habit he hadn't broken. When noon came, she insisted on preparing lunch. Gideon didn't argue. He simply sat near the window, whittling a spare piece of wood as he watched her work. She moved slowly at first, unused to a kitchen where no one yelled if she made noise, but soon her hands found a rhythm. She sliced vegetables, stirred broth, kneaded dough. Cooking was the one place she'd ever felt competent. Hidden behind a stove, people didn't stare at her body. They only cared about the food. Gideon lifted his head when she set the meal down: vegetable stew with herbs, a loaf of soft bread, slices of roasted carrot. "You can cook," he said with quiet appreciation. I've always liked it. My father taught me, before he passed." Gideon took a bite. "It's good." Just 2 words, but they lit something warm in her chest. After lunch, they headed to the barn. Abigail rolled up her sleeves and grabbed a broom nearly twice her height. Gideon watched her struggle for a moment, then handed her a smaller one. "You'll manage better with this." "Thank you." He mucked the stalls with methodical strength while she swept stray hay into neat piles. Dust rose in golden clouds through the sunlight pouring from the open doors. Gideon hummed under his breath, a low, rough melody that echoed through the rafters. At one point, Abigail slipped on a patch of straw. Before she could fall, a large hand shot out and braced her shoulder. "You all right?" His touch was warm, steady, too steady. Her cheeks heated. "I'm fine," she whispered. Gideon didn't move away immediately. For a heartbeat, they stood close enough that Abigail felt the softness of his breath brush her temple. Then he stepped back. "Take slower steps," he said. "The floor gets slick this time of year." But the faint warmth in his voice stayed long after his hand left her. By dusk, they finished the barn. Abigail stood in the doorway, wiping her brow, chest swelling with a strange and unfamiliar feeling, pride. "Good work," Gideon said as he closed the gate behind the last goat. "You held your own." She turned to him, startled. "I did?" "You did." He didn't say it as flattery. He said it like a fact, a truth she hadn't known she needed. Dinner that night was quieter. Abigail kept glancing at him, trying to understand why he looked at her the way he did now, not as a burden, not as a joke, but as someone who belonged in the space beside him. When the meal ended, Gideon stood to stoke the fire. "I'll take first watch." "First what?" He nodded toward the window. "Storm coming. Animals get restless. Wolves sometimes follow the herd down the ridge. Abigail's pulse quickened. Is it dangerous? Not while I'm here. He said it plainly, confidently, as if protecting her was as natural as breathing. And in that moment, standing near the fire glow, Abigail realized she was no longer afraid of the mountain, not while he watched over it, not while he watched over her. The first sign that trouble was coming arrived with the wind. Gideon noticed it before Abigail did. He always noticed things first, the shift of the pines, the strange quiet that settled over the goats, the way the sky dimmed though the sun had not yet set. It was a hunter's instinct, carved into him after years of surviving alone. Abigail was kneeling in the garden beside the cabin, pulling weeds from between rows of early squash. Her hair was tied back with a strip of cloth, her sleeves rolled, her cheeks flushed from the work. Gideon watched her from the edge of the porch for a few seconds longer than necessary. She looked peaceful. He hadn't seen her peaceful before she came here, but the peace was short-lived. "Abigail," Gideon called, "inside." She looked up, confused. "Is something wrong?" He didn't answer. He stepped down from the porch and scanned the tree line, jaw tightening. "Inside," he repeated, gentler this time. She obeyed without argument, brushing dirt from her skirt as she hurried past him and into the cabin. Gideon closed the door behind her, but didn't lock it yet. He stood there for a long moment, hand resting on the wood, listening. The sound came then, distant at first, but unmistakable. Hooves, multiple horses. Abigail's face went pale. "Is it the wolves you mentioned?" "No," Gideon said. "Wolves aren't that loud." He reached for his rifle. Abigail's pulse quickened. "Is it them?" Gideon met her eyes. "Stay here." He stepped out onto the porch as 5 riders emerged from the trees, stopping a short distance from the cabin. Dust swirled around the horses' legs. Abigail peeked through the window, heart pounding when she recognized the man at the front. Sheriff Colton Hayes, Timber Ridge's lawman, stern, large, and famous for 2 things: enforcing order with an iron fist, and doing anything the town's wealthy families wanted. Behind him were Brett, 2 ranch hands, and a man Abigail didn't know. The sheriff tipped his hat. "Evening, Stone." Gideon didn't move. "You're trespassing." "Law can't trespass." The sheriff smiled without warmth. "Heard you got yourself a house guest." Gideon said nothing. Brett nudged his horse forward, smirking. "We're here to collect her. She's caused more trouble than she's worth." Abigail felt her stomach lurch. Her hands clutched the windowsill so tightly her knuckles ached. "No one here belongs to you," Gideon said. Sheriff Hayes sighed dramatically. "Look, Stone, I don't care what arrangement you 2 have, but that girl owes money in town. $43. Damages, labor fees, penalties. You know how it is." Gideon scoffed. "She owes nothing. Henderson sent her up here as a joke." "A job," Brett corrected quickly. "Community service, actually." Gideon's eyes narrowed. Funny how community service starts with you laughing at a woman who can't defend herself. Brett stiffened, but kept smiling. "She's trouble, Gideon. Always has been. We're just cleaning up a mess." Abigail couldn't stop trembling. Trouble, burden, weight, joke. She'd heard those words all her life. But then she heard Gideon speak, calm, controlled, and sharper than any blade. "The only mess I see is the 4 of you." Sheriff Hayes shifted in his saddle. "Stone, don't make this difficult." "You're on my land," Gideon replied. "You're making it difficult." Hayes tried another tactic. "Be reasonable. The girl is property of Timber Ridge until her debt is paid. Gideon's voice dropped to a dangerous low. Say, property again. Brett swallowed. Even he understood the warning. Sheriff Hayes exhaled. She comes with us, or you'll be obstructing town law. Your law doesn't reach this mountain. You sure about that? Gideon stepped off the porch. He walked slowly, deliberately, stopping a few paces from the sheriff. His rifle hung loose in one hand, but even Abigail could see he didn't need it to be threatening. I know the law, Gideon said. Better than you think. Hayes frowned. What's that supposed to mean? Gideon didn't answer. Instead, he said, Abigail Turner is under my protection. She works here. She lives here. You won't touch her. From the window, Abigail felt her heart unravel. Not because he said she worked there, not because he said she lived there, but because he said protection, because he said you won't touch her, because for the first time since her father died, someone stood between her and the world. Sheriff Hayes wasn't impressed. Stone, he growled, you're isolating yourself too long. You forget how things work down in the valley. Gideon's voice was ice. And you forget what happened last time someone tried to take something from me. A shudder ran through the group. Brett tried to recover. So she's your little pet now? Your barn-cleaning pig? Figures. No real woman would want to... He didn't finish. Gideon moved so fast Brett didn't even have time to breathe. One moment the big man was on horseback. The next, Gideon had him by the boot, yanking him to the ground with a thud that rattled Abigail's bones. What you call her again? Gideon asked quietly, towering over the boy. Brett gasped, scrambling backward in the dirt. Nothing. That's what I thought. Gideon released him, but the message couldn't have been clearer. Sheriff Hayes scowled. Enough of this. We'll be back with a court order. I'll be waiting. Hayes pulled his horse around. This isn't over, Stone. That girl belongs to us until her debt is paid. Gideon's eyes flashed. Then I guess I'll pay it. Abigail's breath hitched. Tears blurred her vision. Sheriff Hayes paused. The debt's gone up. How much? $50. Gideon didn't blink. Done. Hayes blinked instead, clearly not expecting that. You're a fool, Stone. She's not worth $1. Gideon stepped forward, voice like thunder. $50 to keep her safe is a bargain. Now get off my mountain. No one argued that time. The riders turned and disappeared into the trees, leaving the clearing silent except for Abigail's shaking breaths. Gideon came back inside slowly, set his rifle against the wall, and closed the door behind him. He didn't turn around when he said, quietly but firmly, They won't touch you, not while I'm breathing. Abigail pressed her hands to her mouth as sobs broke free, quiet, trembling, full of years of swallowed pain. Gideon turned then, his expression softening at the sight of her tears. You're safe here, he repeated. She stepped toward him before she even realized she was moving. Why are you doing this for me? He hesitated only a moment. Because I know what it's like to lose everything, he murmured, and because you didn't deserve what they did to you. His eyes held hers with a quiet intensity she had never known. And maybe, he added gently, because the cabin hasn't felt this alive in a long time. Abigail's breath trembled. Gideon, I don't want to be a burden. You aren't. Or a joke. You aren't. She whispered, barely audible. Then what am I? Gideon stepped close, close enough that she felt the warmth of him, close enough that her heart tripped and stumbled. You're someone worth fighting for, he said. Her knees nearly gave out. The next 2 days passed in a strange, heavy quiet. Gideon worked outside more than usual. He split wood until dusk painted the sky purple. Abigail watched him from the window as she kneaded dough or stirred soup, her heart twisting every time the axe came down. She had never seen a man carry so much weight, not just in muscle, but in silence. By the third morning, Abigail woke with unease clawing her chest. She knew something would happen. She knew Sheriff Hayes wasn't the kind of man to accept defeat, and she knew Brett was too prideful to let Gideon's warning stand. But nothing prepared her for the sound that shattered the calm. 8 horses approaching fast. Abigail ran to the window. "Gideon," she whispered, frozen. He was already outside before she finished saying his name. The riders burst through the trees. Sheriff Hayes, Brett, 3 ranch hands, and 3 deputies armed with rifles. Dust billowed behind their horses. They looked ready for war. Abigail hurried to the porch, her breath short. Gideon raised a hand without looking back. "Stay inside, Abigail." She didn't move, not this time. Sheriff Hayes dismounted and strode forward. "Stone, I'm done playing. Step aside." "No." "Last chance." "No." Hayes signaled the deputies. 3 rifles lifted. Abigail gasped. "Gideon!" He glanced over his shoulder, eyes steady. "Inside." She shook her head. "I won't leave you." The words made Gideon's jaw tighten, just barely. But he didn't argue. He stepped forward, putting himself between the men and the cabin. The sheriff reached into his coat and withdrew a document. A lawful writ signed by Judge Whitlock. Abigail Turner is property of the town until her debt is paid. "She owes nothing," Gideon said. "That's not what this says." Hayes waved the papers, and the debt rose again. Damage fees, disobedience, refusal of service. His smile twisted. $100? That's extortion. "It's the law," Hayes replied, "and I enforce it. Bring her out." Abigail clutched the railing. "No, please." Brett snickered. "We'll take her nice and easy. She's heavy, but we got enough men." Abigail flinched like she'd been struck. Gideon didn't flinch. "Put your rifles down," he warned. Hayes shook his head. "You don't give orders here." "I do on my land." Hayes stepped closer, jabbing a finger into Gideon's chest. "Stone, you think you're tough because you live with bears and snowstorms, but law is law. Move." He shoved Gideon. It was a mistake. Gideon didn't move back. He didn't blink. But the moment Hayes's hand touched him, something ancient and dangerous cracked open inside the mountain man. The deputies raised their rifles. Abigail's scream tore from her throat. "Stop!" She shoved past Gideon and stood in front of him. Everyone froze. Abigail trembled, but her voice when it came was clear. "I'm not going with you." Brett laughed harshly. "You don't have a choice." "Yes, I do." Her voice rose. "I'm not property. I'm not a joke. I'm not the town's entertainment. I'm tired of being what you call me." Her breath shook, but she didn't step back. "Gideon treats me like I'm human." "You never did." Sheriff Hayes frowned, thrown off balance. "Girl, don't be foolish." "Hear me!" Abigail shouted, startling even Gideon. She pressed a hand to her chest. "I will not go with you. Not today. Not ever." Hayes opened his mouth, but Gideon's voice rolled over the clearing like thunder. "You heard her." He stepped forward, towering behind Abigail, her shield, her wall, her mountain. "She said no," Gideon growled. "And if any man here thinks he'll drag her from this land against her will, try." He chambered around in his rifle. The sound cracked the air. Deputies flinched. Horses reared. Brett fell off his saddle in panic. Even Hayes recoiled a step before regaining his composure. "This is your last warning, Stone," the sheriff hissed. "And this is yours," Gideon replied. "Cross this line." He drew a line in the dirt with his boot. "And you won't walk back down the mountain." Silence, thick, heavy, trembling. Hayes weighed the odds. Gideon Stone wasn't bluffing, and every man in the clearing knew it. Finally, the sheriff spat into the dirt. "This isn't over." He grabbed Brett by the collar, yanked him onto his horse, and motioned for his men to withdraw. 8 horses retreated into the forest. 8 shadows swallowed by trees. 8 threats riding away because one man and one woman stood their ground together. When the last hoofbeat faded, Abigail's legs gave out. Gideon caught her before she hit the porch. "You shouldn't have put yourself in danger," he murmured. She looked up at him, eyes wet but burning with something fierce and new. "I stand where you stand." Gideon stared at her. Then he pulled her into his chest with a breath that shook, not from fear, but from the realization that she had changed everything. Night draped itself over Ridge Peak in a heavy, windless hush. The danger had passed hours ago, yet the cabin still held its breath. Abigail sat near the fire, wrapped in a wool blanket, her hands trembling long after the riders were gone. Gideon brewed tea at the stove with movements that were too careful, too restrained, like a man terrified of what almost happened. When he finally turned toward her, the lamplight caught the bruise forming on her wrist. Brett had grabbed her before Gideon stepped between them. Gideon froze. "Who did that?" His voice was low, dangerous. Abigail quickly hid her hand. "It's nothing. I just—" "Who?" he repeated. She swallowed. "Brett." Gideon's fists clenched so tight his knuckles whitened, but he said nothing. Instead, he crossed the room and knelt before her, taking her wrist gently, as if her skin were the thinnest glass. "You could have been taken," he whispered. "I wasn't. You could have been hurt, but I wasn't. You could have died, Abigail." Her breath caught. She had never heard that tone from him. Fear wrapped inside anger, wrapped inside something deeper, something that sounded like a man who'd already lost too much in his life and refused to lose again. She lowered her gaze. "I couldn't just hide while they threatened you." "You should have," he said, not harshly, but painfully. "And you should understand," she answered softly, lifting her eyes to him, "that I won't stand anywhere except beside you." Silence filled the room like warm smoke. Gideon's breath slowed, his shoulders loosened, as if her words had cracked something open inside him. He lifted a hand and brushed a strand of hair from her cheek. "You shake when you're afraid," he murmured. "So do you." He huffed a breath, half a laugh, half disbelief. "I'm not afraid of men like Hayes." "No," she said, "you're afraid of losing someone. I saw it today." Gideon closed his eyes, jaw tightening. "I can't go through that again." "Then don't," Abigail whispered. "Don't lose me. I'm right here." Her voice barely carried across the space between them, but Gideon felt it like a hand gripping his heart. Slowly, as if asking permission, he placed his palm over hers. "You're safe here," he said. The words were rough, uneven, because they weren't a promise, they were a plea. Abigail leaned forward until her forehead rested against his. "It feels like home," she breathed. If you still want me here." His hand came up, cupping her cheek with reverence. "Abigail," he said, her name gentle on his tongue, "this is your home now, if you'll have it." Her breath hitched, her eyes blurred, and something inside her, something she had kept locked behind years of humiliation, hunger, loneliness, finally broke open. "I'll have it," she whispered. "I'll have you." Gideon kissed her then, soft and slow, like a man giving thanks rather than taking anything. The fire cracked quietly. Snow began to fall outside, and the mountain, so often cruel and cold, seemed to warm around them. They stayed there long after the kiss ended, her head on his shoulder, his arm around her waist, the storm inside both of them finally settling, because, for once, neither of them had to walk through the world alone. The mountains held their breath long after the fire dimmed. Abigail slept first, curled against Gideon's chest, as though she'd finally found the place her heart had been searching for since the day the world first called her worthless. Gideon didn't sleep at all. He kept one hand resting over hers, listening to the quiet, letting himself believe, truly believe, that he'd been given a second chance at something he thought he'd lost forever. Stories like theirs don't begin in perfection. They begin in brokenness, in fear, in the courage of two people choosing each other anyway. Where in the world are you listening from today? And if you still believe love can grow where cruelty once stood, stay here with me. The next story is already waiting for you.